Hello, welcome to the channel and thanks for joining me. Today I'm going to be flipping a pair of bedside cabinets that I got on Facebook Marketplace. You may just see them on the monitor behind me. They had some potential, but they certainly needed some TLC and were in worse condition than I expected when I picked them up. We'll get onto that in a second, but first, if we just cast your mind back to the previous video on the Nathan telephone table, we discussed the relative merits of whether or not you should paint MCN furniture and things like that, and we looked at these so-called all-in-one paints where they don't need a primer or a top coat. So I thought I'd do something a bit different today. Now, I said last week that I always prime my work first for a number of reasons. And today I thought, well, actually, let's give it a go. Let's do a piece without priming it. Let's just use one of these so-called all-in-one paints and see what the relative pros and cons are. So did it go as planned? Let's find out. So here's our first look at the units then. I could tell from the Facebook Marketplace photo that they had solid wooden tops, and it turned out that apart from the side panels, they are entirely wooden construction. So I thought I'd be in for a bit of an easy ride on this one, but they had been stored in a garage and they smelt very much of tobacco and damp and faustiness, so they've needed a few weeks to dry out and air out before we could start this really, but you could still see some of the general dust and dirt that's come back from being stored in the workshop with overspray and all that kind of thing. So they are going to need a decent clean before we start. You can see there's a bit of blown chipboard on the side there as well, and there's some dings and scratches to address, as you can see. Now that's the first thing. Of course, if we were to paint this directly now without any primer, then all of these imperfections would be visible anyway, so there's no way we could just paint this directly as it is. Nonetheless, we'll start by giving this a clean again. I had already done this, but because, as I say, they've been in storage for a while, they've got sort of overspray and general dust and what have you. So we're going to give them a nice clean, give them a freshen up and get them ready to go. Now these particular sticky pads here took about 10 minutes to get off, would you believe? And this is where you start losing time on cheap flips, is there can be silly things like this that can take ages with degreaser and alcohol and knives trying to scrape this back a little bit. And we ended up getting them off with as minimal damage as possible, but you can see that this is just paper covered chipboard, so there's quite a lot of sort of superficial damage to the colour, but there's a few dings and damage and stuff as well. Plus, where the chap had built this, I think he'd blown the nail through the side of the unit, so I wanted to knock that back through and basically just use a little drift here and wanted to just chip out some of the blown chipboard just to see what would happen. And it wasn't actually the nail itself poking through, it was just that it had detached some of the woodwork on the side. So by just leveling and flushing that back, that gives us something we can fill in a moment. But again, another thing we couldn't have got around if we'd just applied some paint to it. Next then was to remove the legs. Fortunately for me, the chap who built them didn't do a great job of assembly, so they were easy enough to get off. They hadn't been glued or anything like that, but they needed to be removed so that we could sand them ready for staining, which I think is going to be the nicest finish for these today, especially as we're working on a budget. So here they are, ready to go. But first we'll just turn our attention briefly to the cabinet, tighten up all the cam dowels, make sure that everything is nice and snugged up and tight so that we don't have any loose panels after we've painted it. So we're sanding the units down now, just getting rid of any loose or flaking lacquer and providing a key for the paint. And again, with these all-in-one paints, you're not supposed to need to do this, but we still need to do a professional job at the end of the day, and it is much more advised to actually provide a key for the paint so it stays on properly. We have to do a professional job at the end of the day after all. So after a wipe down, we can see the wear marks and the dings and the scrapes that are still left behind. Now clearly we can't paint this as it is, we do need to address all of these. There's also that blown bit of chipboard to address as well, so we need to mix up some filler for that. And today we're using some dolphin glaze. It's a two-part epoxy. It won't shrink or crack, so we can just give that a gentle pass over any of the obvious gouges and imperfections before we move on. Now, again, the theme here is it's all very well painting something, but if you haven't prepped it in the first place, it's only going to look as good as your prep. So while that's drying, we'll move on to the drawers. and a couple of drawers had that mould stains and sort of residual smells and things. Again, a Zinsser primer, a shellac primer, would have addressed that, but we haven't got the luxury of a primer today. So what we're going to do is invert the drawers now and freshen them up, turn them over so we've got a nice fresh face pointing upwards. But first we've got to remove some of these nails from the backboard. So we'll get that done. Give the bottoms a gentle sand to clean them up, but put them clean side back in, reassemble the drawers, and then they will be good to go. So to prepare the legs, again a gentle sand just to get rid of any marks and water stains and anything like that. It's a cheap and cheerful flip today, so we're not doing anything clever with the legs. We're not putting hairpin legs on or reprofiling these or anything. We're just going to stain them a nice colour. So a 3-part furniture clinic system for this. First thing we need to do is condition the wood, then we're going to add a walnut stain followed by a couple of layers of matte varnish. First up then is to condition the wood to give it a nice uniform absorption for the stain and just to seal everything in. And whilst that's drying, we can go ahead and sand down some of that filler that we put on the units earlier on. Only to notice that again there are more marks and dings in a different light, so we're back to filling it with some knifing putty this time. So you can see we're already not at the stage, don't be disillusioned, I should say, by the fact that you should be able to just paint furniture. There's a lot of prep involved, but now that we think we're ready, we can get some tape and drape and mask off the areas of the drawers that we don't want to get any paint overspray on. So this is great stuff. Just stick it around, pull down the protective plastic, and you're away. So those 4 drawers are ready to go. Soon be time for the paint. But I will just add some masking tape over the runners to protect it from the worst of the overspray. Right, that's the prep done. Let's do the fun stuff. So now the conditioner has dried, it's time to apply the stain colour on this. And 1 coat should be all we need, I think, because I still want some of the grain to show through and I don't want it to be too dark. So we'll leave this on for a minute or so before gently wiping it back. And you may notice some of the back and forth that's going on between the cabinets, the drawers, the legs, and that's because we're doing this in the real order to show you how you have to make the best use of time when you're doing a project like this. So you might be letting something dry while something else is being sanded and vice versa. Anyway, here we are then, so a minute or so later, gently wiping back with the grain just to start to give us a nice decent colour. And that will continue to soak in for a little while, so we'll leave that for an hour or so to dry before we put the top coat on. It's time for paint then, and I was delighted to see that we had a Dunelm open in our town recently, and even better still, they carry an exclusive range of Rust-Oleum satin furniture paints. I fell in love with the rhubarb, I've got to say, and I originally bought it for that Nathan telephone table seat before we actually restored it to its original finish. So today we get to crack the lid and unleash it on these bedside cabinets. Now it is designed to be rollered or brushed on, but we always spray our Rust-Oleum paints. We always believe we get a much nicer overall finish, but you can just brush it on if you want to. Just adding a touch of water here just to make it easier to spray, get it to the texture and consistency that we want. Obviously a clean cup, clean sieve, just to make sure there are no nasties. Obviously it's a new can today, it shouldn't be an issue, but it's always good practice to filter it anyway. So all that remains is to turn the air cleaner on, get the respirator on, and we'll start painting. Let's go. That's the first coat on then, and the first thing that I notice is the transparency of the paint without the primer, and also the different absorption rates of the paint into different surfaces as well. But nonetheless, I'm going to let that dry now, let it do its thing, and we'll move back to the legs. So the wood stain has dried while we were painting the cabinets. We'll get some varnish on now, and this will help to richen and deepen the colour and unify them a bit, and they already look a lot nicer. Right, let's take a quick look back at these cupboards. And now they've dried, we can see a lot more marks now. You can see that even in bright light and close up. It's opened up the grain. There's a lot of pores, a lot of intermittent, inconsistent areas of soaking in. Again, a primer would have cured all of that. It would have shown up the issues to begin with and provided a unified coat for the paint. Nonetheless, we better crack on, start filling these again, and then sand them. So once the filler had dried, we sand back, and it looks like we're pretty much back to square one. Instead of being near the end, we've now need another 2 or 3 coats of paint. So maybe a false economy by not priming these perhaps. So having given a spot coat and a thick coat over the top, that's effectively 2 to 3 coats of paint over there. We let that dry. And then here it is after the 3rd stroke 4th coat, depending on which part you count. But they are looking a lot better now, a lot more consistent, and the sanding and filling between coats has definitely worked. So we did get there in the end, and I think it's all going to be okay, you know. So now that I'm confident that the painting is done, I can remove the masking, and these are looking better and better all the time. We can fit the knobs now then. So the original ones were proportionally nice, you know, they were a good size, nice shape and decent quality, but they were quite worn and they would have needed painting and refinishing and what have you. And given that we've gone and treated it to a fancy new colour, I thought we'd go with these satin gold brand new knobs, and they will just make it pop that little bit nicer. Just helps it give it that more finished, professional and new look. So we'll screw those home and we're almost there. So time to remove the masking tape and check the runners are all working nicely, and it's reassembly time. So this time I'm actually using some tight bond glue here in addition to the original screws that were on there. That'll stop them from coming adrift from their locations in the future. So all we've got to do is tighten those up and make sure that they're nicely aligned as well. And I'm just using a level here, or any straight edge will do, just to make sure that they're all lined up nicely. Time to reinstall the drawers now. Rachel's joined me. She's applying a bit of salve to the edges there just to help us to engage the runners. It can be a bit tricky to get the metal runners back in sometimes. So here we go, a bit of a 2-person job, but the aid of that salve just helps that to slide in there. So we'll line those metal runners up on the edges, and all it remains is to screw those into position. Just check that the drawer is running nicely. Only job left to do then is apply a bit of salve to the inside of the drawers, a bit of lemon balm here just to nourish the actual wood and bring a bit of a fresh citrus zing to it. And with that, it's time for a fade to black and a final reveal. So here they are then, the bedside cabinets looking pretty in pink. I have to say they've turned out a lot better than I expected, and I have to also caveat that by saying you only get out what you put in. These things were in somewhat of a mess when they originally arrived. They had mould, they had chips and dents and marks and dings, and they were smelly and just generally not very pleasant. We've painted them though, we've given them some TLC, we've filled them, sanded them, stained the legs, we've put new knobs on there, and they really complement that colour so nicely. I'm really pleased. Now, we did say, can you paint furniture with all-in-one paint without a primer? Well, the answer obviously here is yes, you can. I would say though, you only get out what you put in, so unless you're starting off with a pretty perfect piece of timber to start with, do your prep, guys. Always do the things you still need to do. Get that key in there for the paint work, fill any holes, sand it back as flush and nice as you can, and then you've got half a chance. So anyway, I think it's all turned out well in the end. Thanks very much indeed for watching. Check out some of our other videos. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Hit the notification bell for updates. We'll be back soon, but you guys stay safe in the meantime. We'll see you soon. Bye bye.